Let's look at some of the new spectrum analyzer features, the keyboard, and the new EQ match. Now I'm going to play some music and just draw some nodes. All right, this is sounding nice and looking good, but let's say I want to get these nodes to conform to the frequencies associated with actual musical notes. Well, I can, of course, type in here not only the frequency number, but I can type in C1 or C#1, etc. But when the keyboard is visible, what I can do is click on the dot over here, and it'll quantize the pitch to the nearest musical note value. So we see it's 25 cents flat now, and if I click on it, boom, it just snapped it to 0, 0. If I hover my mouse there, I'll see the same thing. So same thing here. We can see this is 37 cents flat, but I can just click there and it snaps it to it. And here, 27 cents flat, snaps it to it. Now, the other nice thing we can do with the musical keyboard visible is we can drag these dots around and move them. So we're changing the frequency range, but rather than just dragging freely, we're quantizing the movement to the musical values based on the frequencies associated with those pitches. So that's a really nice function of that. Now let's look at some of the analyzer functions. I'm going to hover the mouse over here, and we have 3 different detection modes. We can view a spectrum analysis of the signal before it's EQ'd, and that's in pre-mode, post-EQ, which is after all these changes, and we can have both enabled and see them overlaid on each other, and then the sidechain mode, which is useful for when we're using EQ match, which we'll look at in a moment. So let's start by looking at the pre-mode. So we see the spectrum for that, and of course if I enable post as well, we'll see 2 of them now overlaid. And let me put on the freeze button so we can hold it there. Let me turn that off for the moment. So you can see the 2 different shadings here indicating the pre and post and the discrepancies where we have EQ changes. Now there's some display settings here to control how this is produced. We have a range control. 90 dB is the default, but we can have it finer or coarser. So you can see here it's going lower in the range of the whole plot versus if we hover the mouse here and set it to 120, it'll take up more of the range of the plot. So that's just a display setting. I'll leave it at the default of 90 dB. Now we have resolution, which determines how precise the spectrum analyzer works. I'll put it on maximum, and you'll see more increments of breaks between the different frequency ranges. So it's a little bit finer. And again, I'll just put it back to medium for the moment. And then speed determines the release speed of the spectrum. Let me turn freeze off, and it basically determines how long it's held for. So the longer it's held, the more you'll be able to examine it more closely. Let's start with the setting of slow, so it'll fall slowly. You can see here it's going down at a much slower rate than if I have it at very fast, for example. It dances around more quickly. In other words, it's more sensitive, plus it releases quicker. So let's leave it at medium. And the tilt function, which is new, tilts the spectrum around 1 kilohertz with a slope that's measured in dB per octave. Keep your eye, I'll set it to 1.5 dB. Keep your eye on the low end. See how high up it's tilted versus if I go to the opposite direction. It's weighted more towards the bottom. So again, it's just a visual display thing. And finally, we have the spectrum grab, which is a nice new feature. And this works best with post mode here, since we want to view the graph post these EQ changes. And what it does is it allows you to hover your mouse in the spectrum so that it's held and you can grab any of the peaks and create a node, a bell-shaped node, just by clicking and dragging. And it determines the cue for you, but you can always, of course, adjust it after or hold down the command key to override that. So there we can see this is boosted up here because this is where I have this EQ boost. But it's sort of frozen there. I can grab there and grab a node, and I'll hold down command, and now I'm changing the cue. You can do that while you're doing it or after, and release the mouse and it reverts to the regular display. So that's the spectrum grab. Now EQ match is really cool. Let me just set this to default. What it allows you to do is sort of measure or analyze the frequency spectrum of another track and then automatically apply it to the track that you have this on. Now, we have this on target mix over here. You can see it over here. And I have another little audio track here. I'm going to play it for you. I'll just solo it. And it's got a very different kind of frequency response. It's a lot more bass heavy than this one. So let's say I want to study the analysis of the frequencies from here and apply it to the target mix. So let me just mute this so we're not hearing both. I'm going to set the sidechain input to this source mix track. So it's going to listen to that. And then in here, what we need to do, I'm going to take off the spectrum grab. We turn on EQ match, and it basically enables the sidechain analysis mode. And I'm getting this exclamation mark because no audio is playing right now. But the idea is that I'm going to play the audio, and after a few seconds, it's going to sort of stop dancing around and even out as it determines the spectrum of the source audio, and then applies suggestions to the new one. Okay, so it's pretty stable there. You need to let it go for a few seconds to sort of learn the source frequency response. So what I can do now is press the match button, and it creates nodes in this instance here on the target track so that it'll match the frequency spectrum. Now we can use the slider to make coarser or finer adjustments. If we go down, we'll just get the broad sort of general shape, but the finer we go, the more individual nodes there are and the more closely it matches what it's studied. And then we can click finish, and we're left with that, and we can of course adjust it to taste after that. Now it doesn't necessarily sound great on this specific mix, but the idea is to match up closely. So I can pull this one down. I might not want the low end boosted quite so much, but the general contours are basically matched. Now let me just clear this for a moment and do this one more time. And let's put EQ match on. And what I want to show you is that we can monitor either the input signal or the sidechain signal separately, so I can pause one or the other. So there it's doing both, and that's the normal mode of operation. Now here's another interesting function we can do. I'll just leave the default number of nodes that it's created. It's a pretty intelligent algorithm. We can, let's say, select a bunch of those and do this thing where it moves in opposition if I want to scale the response a bit. So I'm preserving the general contour, but just sort of scaling it and having the scaled version apply to this track. It's kind of like applying it by percentage. So that's a more realistic way of matching up the frequency spectrum of these two tracks. So those are a couple of ideas on how to use these new features. See you for more in the next video.